Hey guys, Justin Bell here on Life with Legends. Well, just a week or so ago, we wrapped on Luftgekult 8, the most incredible gathering of air-cooled Porsches right here in Los Angeles, and the people that love them. The man behind it all is Patrick Long. But this is Patrick's second life, and the first was as America's factory Porsche driver for around 2 decades. I have watched his career evolve and grow into something pretty formidable, and he was always as popular with the teammates he had as with his fans. He has won so much behind the wheel of Porsches that it is no surprise that his name is so enthusiastically linked to the brand here in the US. He won his class at the Big Four, Daytona, Sebring, Le Mans, Petit Le Mans, more than once, and got really well known as teammate to famous actor and true car guy Patrick Dempsey. Although he still seems like a kid to us older guys, his business acumen is now taking center stage. He's found his stride, and I think his post-racing life is going to be equally successful. We talk about all that and more, and I found out, finally, who actually cuts Patrick Dempsey's amazing hair. Yeah, tune in, listen, enjoy, and thanks for watching. You are, so you're not retired, not Captain Patrick Long retired.
No, I don't think that accolade or even term fits the age or the era or the result. I just was ready to step outside of a full-time driving career to prioritize some things that I've been talking about for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I thought, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? And a lot of it was driven by family. I mean, now that I'm on the other side of it and the PR spin goes away, a lot of it was driven by family. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I thought to myself, I can go another 10 years at this rate.
Sure.
But where will they be in 10 years? And what will my relationship be like with them if they're 16 and 14, and looking at me like, brilliant, we've loved watching you on TV, but where were you on the dance recitals and the soccer games? So I have a great opportunity to try and stay active both in the car and out of the car, but on my schedule instead of the termed motorsport schedule.
Yeah, because 41 is an interesting age to make that transition. I was thinking about it when I realized you were 41 this morning.
40.
Don't
add.
By the time this comes out.
Yeah, 41 we'll go.
I mean, Dad won 4 Le Mans and 2 World Championships between the age of 40 and 50.
Unreal.
There you are.
Yeah.
I mean, when there were 2 guys in the car.
Mm-hmm.
So you should never. We had T-shirts done. We will do them for you.
Yeah.
I'm back again.
Exactly.
At Le Mans, Derek Bell's retiring again. They did like 3 of those.
Did he have multiple retirements?
Like 3.
Yeah.
Well, it was the same as you. It wasn't retirement like the world stopped and like a president was retiring, or whatever. But you had kind of a retirement party a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Surprise. And Dad did as well. But then someone calls you and says, you know what, we're putting together this amazing team, we're going to Le Mans or whatever.
Yeah.
If you got that call.
Yeah, if it's the right scenario, I'm staying race fit. I'm in the go-kart every 2 weeks to maintain, because it's easier to maintain than it is to rebuild.
Oh, yeah.
I always love racing vintage cars every opportunity, as long as I know who works on the car and who I'm around racing. But the reality is that since 2014, let's say for the last 6-7 years, I've worked a full-time job, and then I've gone racing. So I've sort of felt as though I was living a double life.
That's because of Luft.
Yeah, Luft,
totally.
and I made a conscious effort from the beginning to try and insert myself wherever the opportunity existed with Porsche outside of the race car. But that, of course, then stemmed into Luftgekult, my own company, which is a full-time job. So that fulfills me from a challenge standpoint, from remaining engaged, active. I mean, I was at the Rolex 24 this year with 2 Rolex 24 winning cars, displaying them and running an agency. So I'm not laying on the couch by any stretch.
No.
I haven't caught up on Netflix yet.
I think that's the wonderful thing about our lives, is that you can have these phases that you had no clue were going to come when you were ahead of you, when you were a teenage boy. I mean, listening to your dad talk, which was one of the funnier moments of the evening, and you shutting him down as I'm not going to say any more, but now I'm going to say this.
There was a curfew, so I had to give people time to drink.
But obviously, it just hit me in that moment. And we're talking about when you had your little retirement, unexpected surprise retirement party the other day in downtown. I was standing there going, behind every one of us, anyone that's done anything, there's a dad or a mum or a group of people without which you couldn't have done it.
Oh,
and your dad obviously was that guy.
Yeah.
And his look on his face, I thought, I wish I'd looked out for it. The look on his face when you won at Daytona, the look on his face when you won at Le Mans, because those are massive milestones. But I'm sure it's the same look on his face when you won a karting championship, right? He must have been so proud.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. So my dad is a carpenter, kind of a college dropout surfer from Southern California who just had a great work ethic, a son of two military army parents, and just busted his ass and worked to build a company from the garage up to a small, modest, 25 employee wood shop. They did finished carpentry. And so he would be at the office and the door would be closed and he would be talking to go-kart teams trying to find me a ride. And he always was in my corner, even when I was mid-pack. And I just talked about how all of us had a dad or a parent or an uncle or somebody who had to put all their chips on us for whatever amount of money or time that was for the family. And so we all have that story. But when I got up there and sort of just gave a little bit of a toast, I just said I wanted to talk about my old man and I wanted to talk about my wife. I didn't want to talk about the teams. I didn't want to talk about all the people who actually gave me the opportunities. It was just about the kind of start and the end of this chapter. And getting back to the retirement age, although 40 sounds ridiculously young to make a conscious decision to step out of the car, it was 18 years in a row with the factory. And that is such a gift. If they would have given me an option for 3 years at that level, I would have cut off a limb for that opportunity. So at a certain point, I thought, I'm at the poker table with my best friends. The chips are up. It's midnight. And I'm going to stand up, give everybody a high five, and go up to the room and hang out with my family. Yeah. It wasn't about not wanting to play anymore. It wasn't about not wanting to be in the circle socially. It was time to stand up from the table. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'll sit back down at the table, but right now there's other things to do. I got to wake up in the morning because duty calls, and that's why I went to bed a little earlier than some. But I've been living abroad since I was 16. I left home at 16, and so I've been on a run since 1998 that I'm ready to now see the surroundings and smell the roses a little bit. And ask me in 18 months, I might be jonesing to get back in, but I'm not betting on it.
Let's unpack that a bit, because you're 16 years old. I imagine you're with your dad the whole time. You've had this karting career and you head off to Europe. That's like, it's like going, it is the other side of the world. I know there's a nice infrastructure once you get there, but it probably was some of your loneliest moments in your life. Mm-hmm. I did it in Japan.
Right.
I've never been so lonely. My grandma died while I was out there. You're in a shitty hotel. You know what those hotels are like in Japan. You can wash your hands, go to the toilet, have a shower, and sleep within 3 square feet, right? Terribly lonely. You must have had some really moments, young Patrick Long, with no skills in that area necessarily, had to dig deep.
It came, but it wasn't right off the bat. It was actually living in Germany at 5 years in that I understood what being alone in the basement of a residential house is like, and everybody's with their families on the weekends. But right off the bat, I was a pretty independent teenager. I remember at 14, my dad hired a part-time mechanic to work with me on some of the race weekends, and he was telling all of his friends, I didn't know how good my kid was until I was not his mechanic and I wasn't screwing everything up. So I was used to working with race teams from 14 years old. And at 16, leaving as a junior in high school was no thought. I had the opportunity to go race for one of the factory karting teams and live in Italy. I had pre-run it that prior summer and had lived in the same apartment I was going to live in. There were other drivers. It was 30 races. So there was no time to be lonely because you were always on the run. Yes. 3 or 4 continents of racing. And then I was working 60 hours a week when we weren't racing, I was working in the workshop, paying my room and board. So I was always around people. So there wasn't a loneliness. And then I had a great roommate in Ryan Briscoe.
Yeah.
I mean, we're still
But
tight.
he was your roommate?
Yeah, we're still
No
tight.
way.
So yeah, we're 16-year-olds, same age. Australia and Southern California, living in Italy with a Japanese guy. The household language was Italian because the Japanese guy didn't speak English and the Aussie and the American had to communicate with him. So the best language we all knew was Italian. So the language came quick, and I just loved the small town of Lonato in the north of Italy. I felt at home. So it wasn't bad from the onset. But, you know, as you move through, I did a year in France, 3 years in the UK, a year in Germany. You're meeting new groups of friends. You're opening a bank account in each town, in each country. And it just allowed me to grow up. At that point, when I left home, I hadn't done laundry. I hadn't made myself a meal. I was totally spoiled. I had a stay-at-home mom. I had a carpenter as a dad, and we were just a small family living in the suburbs of SoCal. And now I'm traveling the world. I'm, like yourself, going to Japan at 16 and seeing the world. So it was a tremendous opportunity. There's not a part of that anyone should feel bad about, but it just allowed me to grow up.
Was, at that moment, though, probably like a tennis player, young basketball, maybe tennis more because they travel so much. Was there immediate disconnect from your friend group over here? Because suddenly you're not going to prom. You're not doing that.
Yes and no. I went for the race season, took my independent study with me. Of course, in the late 90s, email and distant learning and all that was just scratching
Thank
the
God.
surface. Yeah. So I had some schoolwork with me, but the reality of it is that I would come home in October. The season was over in Europe because of the weather, and I would just cram and jam October, November, December, January, February, and I would do a full year of credits in that time. So I was reintegrating with my friends. So it wasn't like I left them for 6 years and didn't see them. So I still felt connected. And luckily I grew up with the same kids since kindergarten. So they always knew me as the kid who raced, right? I was never around on the weekends anyway. So reintegrating wasn't a big deal. But yeah, I mean, you know, you missed all the high school graduation and the prom and all that stuff, but I wouldn't trade it for the world.
No.
We had 50cc scooters and we were out at nightclubs at 16. So I was like, you guys might be partying at the high school gym, but we are partying.
You're doing it for real. What did it feel like when Porsche came a calling and you had that sort of, you got on their radar? Because did you understand what it was going to be like to be a factory driver? It was just an opportunity because you were almost, in my opinion, the last generation, and I talk about it with all the other guys, where it wasn't totally premeditated. You know, kids today doing karting, the parents are already working out what the return will be on their investment in Formula One, right? They're already working that out. I don't think that was probably part of you and your dad's thing, just to get you as far as you could. But you know what I'm saying? That the expectation probably wasn't there. You knew you were going to be successful, but where it was going to lead must have been a mystery.
Exactly. It was such a different time. And I remember I would like go into my dad's closet and pick out a few polo shirts and take them to the dry cleaner and then fly to Mid-Ohio and walk around the IndyCar race, because that's where you had Formula Ford 2000, you had Atlantic, Indy Lights, all the feeder series were there on one weekend. And waiting outside of an IndyCar pit box after practice to just say hello and try to get my name recognizable. Those were the real plans that I had, which was just to network, shake hands, and introduce myself. That's all I knew. And I was so naive when Porsche called because my head was so buried in Formula One and IndyCar and single seaters, as many of us are aiming for. And at that point, it was the Red Bull scholarship had created the awareness that I needed to get on Porsche's radar. And I still had single seaters on my mind. The deal hadn't gone well with Red Bull. And I remember them taking 16 of us, the best drivers they could find. Danny Sullivan was spearheading the effort. And we get to the final four. Four are going to go forward. And there's 6 of us, and 2 of us are going to get sent home, and I'm one of the 2 that gets sent home. So my head is in my hands. Like, that's it. I'm going back home. I'm going to work at the wood shop. I'll do a little bit of karting here and there, but like, I'm done. And Porsche calls and I go and test the car. And I'm like, wow, this is super cool. Obviously, I see Weissach. I get in a GT3 Cup car. A brilliant amount of mechanics and amazing trucks and trailers. We're in Leipzig. And they say, we want you to join the team. But you need to make a full commitment to GT racing and turn your back on all single-seater racing. We want you to be completely tuned in. And I was like, I need to think about it. I'll go home. Well, I'm on my way home anyways for the winter. I'll talk to my family and I'll get back to you.
You said that to them?
They're going to offer me a salary, modest salary, enough to live, a company car, and a factory-prepared GT3 Cup car.
Patrick needed to think about this.
I needed to go home and make sure that this was the tracks were going to change, and I was going to go towards a sports car career.
Did your dad's boot kick you in the ass to get on the phone as you discussed it?
Every single person I called tried to be patient with me, but the context was like, are you a moron?
Yeah.
Like you are 21. Oh, that's right. You don't get it.
Yeah.
Like you're insane.
Yeah.
If you don't sign that deal. I mean, I remember
Who
Danny.
did you talk to? Dan.
I talked to Danny first. I mean, he was the one who introduced me, so I owe everything to him because we were at Indianapolis in 2002 working for Red Bull, but he took me over to meet Uwe Bredel at the Super Cup pit. And so I wasn't completely blind to it. I knew that if I had a chance with any manufacturer at any point, I would take it. But there was this fog in front of me. It was almost like disbelief that they offered me a deal because the test had gone so well. And there was talk of like a couple of Atlantic races. And maybe it was just the way they laid it out to me in that German accent, which was, this is it. Like, no single-seaters, no effing off. You've got to be completely focused.
Whoa.
And they had known that from Timo. They had known that from Lucas. They had known that from a few of the other drivers, that they were going to try and cherry pick a few single-seater or karting races in the off-season. And so they had seen the distractions, and they just said, if you're going to do this, you need to be completely focused. And I was the first non-German to join this UPS junior team. It was 2 cars, 2 drivers. We were racing in the Carrera Cup and the Super Cup.
Who was that? Who else was there?
Mike Rockenfeller was my teammate, who has still made a long career with Audi and just an amazing talent, amazing human. Previous to him, I would be taking the seat of Mark Lieb, Le Mans winner, of course. Lucas, Timo, Mark Bassang, Dirk Mueller. I mean, it was an amazing crop of drivers, and it was such an amazing program. I mean, Owen Hayes, who's still around, and it was the Penske number 7 race engineer, was the engineer that day on the car when I tested, and he became my race engineer. We shared a racing engineer, but we were, fast forward a couple months, DTM was at its prime. Formula One was in a great era, 2003, and we're the support race. We're the opening act to these races, and it was weekend after weekend, Monaco, Monza, Hockenheim, Nürburgring, and here I am, showing up to an amazing prepared race car, and 6 months previous, I was trying to scrape together the money to pay for my cell phone bill. So it was just the ultimate opportunity, and like I told you a little earlier in this discussion, if I could have looked forward from that point and thought I could get 3 years in a race car as a paid professional, that was it. I would be complete. It would have all been worthwhile at that point.
Amazing.
And so
not 18 years. I mean, unbelievable. I just had the thought of you going, you obviously you were young, you were fit, you're going to be fit, you're 21 years old, that's all you did was look after yourself and race cars and karts. What was it like the first training camp with all those guys? Because I know they whistle you off to the mountains. That was probably more intimidating than getting in the car, wasn't it? It
was interesting. Again, when you don't know what you don't know, you sort of just show up and try to fit in. I remember I was home. I signed the deal. I called around. Everybody told me I was an idiot. I signed the deal, and then I partied my ass off because I was like, I made it.
Yeah.
I've made it. Like next year I'm gonna fly to Germany. I'm gonna move to Germany, and I'm gonna be a pro. And so this winter I'm gonna let loose. And so we were
no schoolwork.
Yeah, no, we were just flat out. Like we were burning the candle at both ends with all my buddies, and life was good. And I was going to celebrate being the straight arrow of the 20 years prior when we were all hanging out. And so then the phone rings, and it's like, you need to fly to Austria next week. So I remember getting my mountain bike out and like scraping the dust off of it and started just riding everywhere on my bike. My friends were meeting for coffee. I would ride my bike there, and I was thinking, I got to get fit because I know this is going to be crazy. And of course, nothing good was going to come in a week anyway. So it was really just detoxing from all the nights at the bar. And I show up to Austria, and we're at this amazing resort, and here are all these, it was a small team back then. It was probably only 6 or 7 guys, but great human beings. Sasha Mawson, Lucas Lur, Mark Lieb, Timo Bernhard, the guys that I just mentioned, Mike Rockenfeller, all amazing human beings, all guys that made a long career. And they were welcoming. They were speaking German the whole week, but they would break off from the conversation and chat to me a little bit, but it was hard work. We were like snowshoeing straight up the side of a mountain in Austria and at high altitude. But again, like you said, you're 21. I survived, and I bonded with the team. And after that, I just had friends for life. These guys are all still, I'm in touch with all of them, and they're just amazing people.
There's been some really funny stories come out of those training camps. I remember, like on the BMW side, Steve Soper telling me, Winkelhock would basically take a cab, be standing there at the top smoking cigarettes when they all made it to the top. And it's the same in BMW. There's been some guys that, in Porsche did not work out quite the same way as other people, but were the kind of guys that just in a car never backed off.
Right.
Who was like that in there? I'm not saying smoking, but who was the guy that probably didn't like the exercise?
Oh, there was the good boy group and the bad boy group, and without naming names, I'll tell you a story. So we're in Portugal in a pretty intense camp, and we're fit. Like, we're having to run 10, 12K daily, full weight routines, etc. And so the doctor, we make a plan. We're like, this is 10 days of insanity. We felt like we were mentally ill. So we're gonna break out. And there was a gate around this facility in Portugal. It was like used for rugby and football people. And we made a plan. We were like, okay, we're gonna meet at 11:30 quietly here. We know the timing of the gate when the lady leaves at the end of the night, and when the gate opens, we're out, and then we'll figure out how to get back in at the end of the night. But we're gonna go out and see some outside life and have fun. So at the end of that day, we're all like elbowing each other. There's about 4 of us, 5 of us, and
that was obviously the bag group,
right? Yes. And the doctor says, we have this new technology from Polar where you wear your heart rate belt, and it will record, and then we can download the data and see what your resting heart rate is when you're sleeping. And so we're laughing because we're like, this is it, we're committed. Like, we're going. And then part of us didn't really care. He knew who the goody two shoe, and he knew who the bad kids were. And so we have our belts on, and there we go, we're off, and we're like, whatever. And so some people left their belts at home, some people wore their belts, but the next morning he like looked at us, and he knew. And the head doctor says, so some of you had an interesting night last night, some of you were asleep, and would you guys care to offer what the activities were? And so Sasha, who was always very crafty, was like, it was a poker game. So obviously those rises of heart rate was a big bet, and the guy was like, fuck off. Like, we know exactly what you guys did. So no, but in the end, when I look back, even the less fitness focused guys, we were still going at a level that I'm clearly not at today. That was incredible. And so as much as I hated it, and it was one of the least favorite weeks of my time, it was an amazing opportunity. We're flying to Tenerife and training for 10 days. Life wasn't that bad. No.
It's such a funny thing to think of the fitness level that they were. Like, Dad's generation were just strong and fit. Yeah. And Dad worked out, but there were others that didn't. You, again, I think, were on the trailing edge of the getting fit enough, but not triathlon stuff, but now, and super fit, because you're in the car all the time. There's nothing better than that. But what do you think now? You look at the pressures on these young kids, which is going to tie into another question about being a factory driver. But like, they're doing Ironman and triathlons. And the week before races, no one in history was ever as fit as the drivers are now. Look at Formula One, look at IndyCar. Schumacher changed the game for everybody, right?
Yeah.
But it's a lot of pressure. Outside the car, there's now the pressure to be fit.
Yeah, there's so much awareness in the human performance aspect of the mental, the physical, all of it. And that's pushed the game forward for sure. When you look back to Senna, I mean, he was a pioneer on the fitness side, but it was tennis, jet skis, some jogging, eating right. It wasn't hire a six-figure trainer and work out at the level of a professional soccer football player. And that's where it's gone. And that's trickled down. I mean, every Formula One driver is at a certain level. And now into the feeder series of single seaters and over to sports car racing, that's where you have to be. And to run in a DPI car for 3.5 hours at quality pace, that's the difference. And when I get in an argument with Hurley and he says to me, you don't know what it was like to do Daytona with 2 drivers and no power steering. And I say, no, I've driven the car and I really do respect the physicality of what it was like in the 80s, let's say. But it wasn't qualifying pace. You had to take care of the car. You had to be aware of the human performance as well. And don't tell me that you guys were at qualifying pace, because number one, the car wouldn't do it. Number two, the body wouldn't do it. And as you know, the threshold of physicality when it switches from that aerobic to anaerobic is like bending a valve, and over revving. And now to look at what the top level overall athletes are doing in IndyCar, in the prototypes, and even in GT, but especially in Formula One, it's incredible. And I think it is a triathlete performance. And it used to be that a guy like Kanan was a little bit of an extremist to be in that mindset, but now you have to be. And if you look at motocross as well, the Carmichaels and the Bubba Stewarts and even McGrath before him, they were the fittest. They were talented, but they also had applied themselves to fitness. And the top 3 were half a lap ahead of the rest. And this year in Supercross, the top 12 are within a few seconds of each other. And a huge part of that is the human performance.
When you think about, I just thought, like Lewis Hamilton not announcing whether he's coming back or not, more than anyone, while he was making that decision, his trainer was still turning up at his house every day. Because he could not make that, he could not get up to speed in the next month.
100%.
Because I know he's going to announce on Friday that he's going to be there, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But just that level of fitness. I remember staying, DeFerrin and Gilles, so good, great friends with DC. And I remember DC was there, it was like a week before Christmas. And, DC can go for it, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
In a big way. And we were all had a big night out. Gilles and I nursing our heads the next morning. There's a knock on the door, like 8 a.m. and outside his trainer, off he goes for a couple of hours on holiday.
Yeah.
And the trainer flew with him everywhere, paid for by the team to be there to make sure their investment was ready to go.
Yeah. When I signed at the end of 2005, I got another dream break with Penske and the RS Spider. And I had tested the car at Sebring as kind of a final, are you sure you're going to put an American in a prototype? And so I go there and Kuzmal's running the program and it's the all-white test car and the whole Penske crew's there. And I get in and straight away, new tires, an hour in the car. And it was a big eye-opener. As you know, when you get into something with downforce after coming out at GT or lower downforce single-seaters, my head was on the headrest going through turn 5 to the right at the end of the stint. And I got out after the stint and Roland said, how was it? And I was like, man, that was tough. And he just laughed. He goes, we knew it was going to be tough, but we just wanted to see if you could keep the car straight and narrow. And he says, now get to work. So I remember I went and talked to Jim Leo when Pit Fit was kind of in its infancy. And I just knew I needed to commit to fitness at that point as a lifestyle. So where I'm going with this is that someone like Lewis or DC, they made this level of fitness and trainer part of their life. And that's really what is required. Admittedly, I didn't think I was going to sustain that lifestyle. And after the prototype program ended in the end of 2008, I definitely backed off from it being the priority. Everything was about fitness, nutrition, and it was a lifestyle. And once I knew I was going back to GT, I kind of tuned it back a little bit. But there's a youth aspect of that, which goes without saying. Verstappen is what, 22, 23? Yeah. So he's on it for sure.
15 years younger than Lewis.
Right, he's on it for sure. But as you've mentioned, Lewis has to work that much harder, even though he's been at that level for so long. And I'm very lucky to have raced with Lewis for a year and traveled with him. And the thing about him is he's a born athlete.
No one ever really talks about that.
Mental and physical and coordination.
Where did you race with him?
In the UK, Formula Renault.
I had no clue.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'll show you some pictures after this. It's fun. An amazing guy. I got to know him actually in karting because he raced for Dino Chiesa, who ran him and Nico in karting. And so I would go back to watch and hang out with the team. And at one point it was MBM.com, Mercedes-Benz McLaren.com, and they had purchased Dino full time to run this team. So I was watching these two and karting, and they were just already hammer and tongs sparring hard,
Really?
the two of them. And so long story short, a couple of years later, I'm running with Lewis, and I tell this story that we're sharing a hotel room testing at Jarama in Spain, and we're watching TV. The test is over, and he's watching TV, but he's got a tennis ball and just nervous energy. He's throwing the tennis ball. He's not training. He's just bored, and he's throwing the ball against the wall and catching it, but he's watching TV, so it's all peripheral. And he could play basketball. He could sing. He could ride a unicycle. He just was an amazing human being, but still has to give himself 100% to the lifestyle of training. And I'm sure his trainers follow him wherever he goes in life. And I respect the heck out of him because he's still having fun. He's still seeing the world. He's still experiencing different things. He's not just stuck in a gym in a small town. But yeah, when you have the resources and the plane, you can just throw everybody in the back.
I often think that the toughest thing, whether it's Federer, whether it was Schumacher at the time, whether it's Lewis now, I was going to say Bill Oberlin, but but whatever level you're at, to stay there and keep doing it, especially when wealth has extraordinary, almost obscene income, 30, 40, $50 million a year by the time you do your endorsements. When your trainer's outside the door at 6 a.m., you must be like, you can fuck off. You know what I mean? That's what you must want to say inside, right?
Yeah.
Instead, you go out and do it. You might have more insight than I do. What is the driving factor?
I think it's unique for everybody. Maybe it's a goal, a financial goal, the record of amount of world championships.
9. He must need 9. Right?
Yes, there has to be something that's driving. But going back to stepping out, it's all we've ever done, right? It's all we know. You did it. Yeah. It's certain parallels there in that you dedicate yourself to one thing and you go at it so extremely, and there is a love for it, and there is a passion, but there's also this, well, that's all I've ever done, it's all I know. It's like being a horse farmer, like that's what you know. The other side is kind of scary. So if you're still competitive, you're still at the top of your game, and you're making great money, yeah, there's a question of when do you step out and what are you going to do. But for the lifestyle, when I see a tennis player, and I used to watch a girl step out of a pro career, there has to be a part of that mental trauma of being pushed so hard as a young athlete. And Lewis was pushed hard. I know it firsthand. And so you have to face all those battles. But I think that if you're in touch with that and you're doing the work, if you will, and the resources that are around you on the mental side, then why not keep at it? But I believe 2023 will be without Lewis. I think that this year will be a battle royale in 22. It'll be amazing. Win, lose, or draw. I think he's got one more season in him, but I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. It may tie into to Lewis, but every one of us, and I have asked everyone the same question. Interesting when you're talking to people from the 60s and 70s, because a lot of the guys they would answer this question with have died. Not thankfully, touch wood, the case so much with our generation. Was there that kid in karting? Maybe he never made it. Maybe was it a girl? Was it a guy? Or out of the guys that made it, you went, geez, okay, that's pretty special. What he just did in that car, what he just did in that car, what he did in the rain at Le Mans. Because for me, it was Mika Hakkinen. I was like, had the unfortunate timing to be with him and Alan McNeish as we were in the early formulas. I never touched a kart. So they'd done 1,000 races, but it was my first Formula Ford race. Got my ass kicked. Finished third a lot. But Mika would do stuff and you go, oh, God, how did he do that? Who was the guy for you?
Ooh.
I mean, you've raced with some greats,
Yeah.
but it might be tough.
Oh, there are so many, especially in European karting. There were so many people that could do things with a go-kart that you just couldn't believe. I had heroes, I had posters on my wall of Jarno Trulli, and of course he went all the way.
Yeah.
But the guys that raced at that level in those times in the 90s in karting were heroes. They were gods, and they were so unbelievably talented. And so many of them never really got into a race car. The guys like Max Orsini or Davide Fore, I mean, these are like hero karting guys that made a six-figure living in karting, but never went any further. You know, somebody who's relative to our paddock right now is Bobby Orgel. Was a seriously good driver. In karting, I was just coming into seniors at 16, and Bobby was, 6, 7, 8 years older, and he was so smooth, and he was such a wise craftsman of his trade, and he was there at the end. His tires were always good. Alex Barron was his teammate. Alex had a great career as well, and was a phenom in karting. But those were the guys that I looked up to. Richie Hearn was a hero in karting days in Southern California, and so a lot of these guys, I think, deserved longer careers than they had, and were such purest talents that still heroes of mine.
When you look at I had guys, Derek Higgins, who I raced with. I mean, Derek, probably one of the fastest guys I ever drove with in early days. Unfortunately, had a face that looked like a bus had reversed over it, so I don't think that helped him. Derek, I'm sorry if you ever listen to this, but it's true. You probably admit it. But you know what I mean? I think there were things that didn't fit, so maybe that's it. Then, of course, you enter into the era of data, right, and telemetry and all these things, and I think this is probably the most painful but brilliant side of our modern era of racing. I say that because I've talked to Dad privately and said, don't you wish you could have just put your trace up against Jackie X, just because they never did. They didn't have it. Even in the 956s, they didn't really have data. You know what I mean? To look at early data, you talk about the chest band for your heart rate. We never knew what Ayrton Senna's entry and exits were. Most of us, they would have done in the Williams, but what about in sports cars when you were there driving with some of these guys? It lays open, and for anyone that's never done it and been in a race car, it demystifies the ability of the guy you're with. But there's always an element of the time they gain, because you look and you go, oh, he's a tenth quicker into the hairpin, he's a tenth quicker through the kink. So you can see it on paper, but it's quite brilliant when you race with some of the legends, the top Porsche guys you have. You've seen their heartbeat effectively on paper. A long-winded way of me saying this. Did you enjoy that? Did you see sometimes, God, how are they doing that? How are they braking so late? I mean, did you enjoy that side of it, being able to pull from that? That was the longest question in the world.
In the moment, no. In the moment, you're thinking, how is he making that speed? It's the same car. We're at a long-distance test in Paul Ricard. We're running 24-hour simulations in the RS Spider, and Briscoe is just on it. And of course, he did all the Toyota Formula One development at that track. So clearly, that was his home track. And we were thinking, where is he finding a shortcut? Because he's 4/10 clear of everybody. And normally, we're all right on top of each other, and there was no way we were going to get near him. Nick Tandy was never crazy quick in qualifying or practice. He was always at the top, but he wasn't untouchable. But in the battle, he did things that we couldn't really process. So there are little bits of all kinds of characteristics of drivers, but the qualifying lap, that perfect lap, when you see Montoya in the Ganassi IndyCar at Detroit, where there's sparks coming off the wheel as it hits the wall, the level of commitment, those are such hero moments in racing. And I think cold tires is another part of it. If you think of Zanardi, what a wild man he was when he came on the scene in the U.S. racing Champ Car. What he could do, I remember he passed Michael Andretti on a restart end of a race, and they asked him afterwards, how did you make that pass? And he said, I had already initiated braking, and then I just took my foot off the brake. And I thought to myself, what kind of insanity of a driver does things like that? So most of it's innate, in my opinion. Most of it is just making speed and not really going in pre-processed and studied. It's just hanging it out, and it's natural, innate ability. And there are other drivers that I've watched make it through hard work and just understanding the science of how to make a car go fast and having the work ethic and the intelligence to figure it out. But we all like those wild children.
Which camp were you in?
Oh, I was in the middle. I don't think I had the innate talent to make it as a professional, but I also wasn't the hardest worker or most intelligent. I sort of was a bit of a mixture, but never found myself in an untouchable point in my career. Maybe some of my rivals did, but that wasn't really. I think I was reliable, and I think that I could get the car quickly tuned and in position, but never saw myself as a phenom.
Do you think you would have fit the era before you? Like, you stand with those legends, and you stand with the guys. It's kind of a twofold question. First of all, do you think you fit with them? Like, you're standing there with Brian, with my dad, with Vic. All these guys.
No way.
Packed in with them.
No way.
Really?
No, not even in the same sentence. When you told me what the preface of this interview was, I thought, well, maybe I'm on this show because I've had the tremendous opportunity to hang around these legends that you're interviewing, and I could tell stories about them, and so grateful to be able to share the track with them, not in period, but in exhibitions and things like Rennsport, but also to share dinners and events with them, because we are products of Porsche Motorsport and in different times. But the mortality, the physicality, the just period is so incredible in what they've all done. But there are times where I wished that I was maybe 10 or 20 years prior in the generation of racing. It fit my driving style better. It's why I like to drive 962s.
I was about to say 956, 962s would have been right up your street. Yeah,
I love the artisan factor of there's 4 or 5 different ways to make speed in a car, and you have to compromise somewhere. This day and age in GT racing, with traction control, with ABS, with huge downforce, big tires that will allow you to punish them, it's very digital. It's a very digital era of just grab it by its neck and wring it out 11 tenths. And even in your era, I think there were probably some aspect of having to preserve the car. But now, I can speak for myself. In 2004, when I first went to Le Mans, we broke a throttle cable and a clutch, and we're in the garage for some period of time, lost some laps, came back and won GT. If you had one lap in the garage last year, you would be outside the top 10. So attrition is so different now. The technology of the cars is so different now. So it really is wringing the neck out. And all these lines on my face are from just gritting and bearing and just punishing the car for those 18 years and 60 plus 24-hour races of just holding on. And to be at the factory level and to carry the flag, fly the flag, I carried a lot of weight on my shoulders, and rightly so. That was my job. But I remember not long ago, November of 2021, when the release came out that I was not going to be full-time anymore as a factory driver for Porsche. I really couldn't get a sentence out. I was so emotional. And the emotion was relief that, all right, I still had one race to get through, and I wanted to perform, and I wanted to go out at the top of my game. But the time had come. And admittedly, I had been thinking about it for a long time. And it was because I wasn't just a natural ability. I was carrying a lot of tension in putting so much application into my craft to do the opportunity justice and to carry that flag of being a works driver for Porsche.
Good Lord. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that last part. I've often thought about the pressure for you. Porsche, America's only factory Porsche driver, and all the stuff that comes with it. But the pressure around staying there and the pressure around, I seen you, obviously, when I was doing the pit lane stuff for 12 years or more, it's funny because I saw your evolution, I think, especially when you weren't in the factory car and you were the factory gun put into everyone else's car, and that must have also been a mental shift.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, the full factory guys are there. I'm full factory, but I'm driving with Patrick Dempsey. There's a different shift. There's a different semantic to that. But your pressure. I mean, I remember looking at you in the pit lane at Le Mans, and I could see. You could see your hair was redder. It felt.
Mm-hmm.
When you were in that situation,
Yeah.
the redhead was really going. Must have been crazy.
Yeah, there's multiple chapters, like every athlete or every person in the world in life. But I think that there were two kind of storylines. One was what the surroundings and the scenario was. If it was an all factory program, all factory drivers, those were always the most intense scenarios, right? Because it's board money. So it's perform or you're out.
Yeah.
Versus being a works driver, hired gun, and you come in to another program and you're the guest driver for the long race, or you're the second driver of a full season private team.
/ nanny.
Right.
Trainer. Spiritual guru.
Yeah.
Confidence rah-rah guy, right?
Yeah. Yes.
That was something you never done before.
Yeah, that's another aspect of the job that was always present from beginning to end. And if you can't understand how to integrate yourself with the customers at a Porsche factory level, then your career is very short, because there is that whole other aspect. So yeah, you kind of had two roles. You had the ambassador / coach role with a privateer, or in the factory programs, it was a pressure cooker of sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
But in and out of these different programs and intensity and stress, I'm an intense person as it is. I'm work hard, play hard. I'm on or I'm off. And I don't really live in a great balance, but I'm learning that now. The rise of your career and the timeline of your career, if I look at it, I think about the early days. I'm innocent and I'm kind of the new guy and I'm the liability, and then I'm building results and credibility and responsibility. And so you're peaking, and then at the backside, you have your established name. You can fall back on a little bit of a relationship or previous success, reputation. So even if you're not the quickest, great out of the car, and he's right there clipping on the heels of the quickest driver, you still couldn't be very far off. Your name wasn't gonna win you a half a second, but a couple tenths, that was okay. But right at that peak of absolute pressure, it's pretty miserable actually, to live in and out of the pressure of that. But I find the drivers that come out the other end of it and who can talk openly about it, I find so many parallels. Listening to Will Power open up on Dinner with Racers about his stress of being an IndyCar title contender at Penske, you think Will is so naturally gifted and he's with Penske, so everything's taken care of. He's just such a beast in the car. Of course he doesn't overprocess or think about quitting or succumb to the pressure, but he'll tell you candidly on that interview, yeah, absolutely. And so it makes you feel human when you can open up about it.
The moments of, again, I've asked everybody over the years, my heroes, that moment, I asked Dad especially, because I can, when you're with your peer group, like I said, who stood out, I've asked you that, but there is that moment. Everyone still goes and they, on their own, doesn't matter how big the team on, you put your Nomex on and you put your suits on, you're doing your boots, you're buying yourself some little mental time, aren't you? You're buying yourself your moment, and then you maybe text your wife or your kids, and there's very private moments that occur before a very public display of what you do for a living. I imagine those quiet moments were tough for you to find when you were a factory driver, because you're all there, but it is still your own little ritual. Did you have any particular thing you did before you got in the car?
It's interesting because I was so used to operating at that pressure that it was pretty easy for me to, I had learned to switch it on and switch it off. So
Okay.
I could be, especially in your youth, or in the early years, you could be on the pit lane before the race, chatting with everybody and speaking and then jump in the car and go. But towards the end of my career, I got a little bit more tired, and I realized that I needed more alone time to just be calm and quiet and rest. So I would just be in the driver lounge. The last few years of my career, I would be in the driver lounge till the cars were actually on the pace lap. And then I would walk out, sit on the stand, because I was just staying cool mentally and physically. And out of all of that energy burn, you understand how much you exert mentally. As far as family and such, you know, when I think back to the other heroes my heroes that you've interviewed, what it must have been like to strap into the car and know the danger factor, and to really be faced with that mortality all the time, and to lose colleagues, and for those guys to go through the injuries they went through. That is part of the generation that I'm so fortunate to be in. But the few times where we lost a competitor, it really shook me up. So I could only imagine what it was like for those guys on a monthly basis to catch news that somebody was gone, or somebody was completely broken up and burned. But 2 points that stand out to me. 2013, I was with Patrick at Le Mans for the first time, Dempsey, and we were having a great race, and it was a great program, and we were having tons of fun, and we were competitive. And I was in the first stint of the race, and I was running P3 or P4, and I saw Alan Simonson go off the road in front of me. And never did it cross my mind that he was seriously injured. And it was a long a long safety car period. And then after that stint, I was on the massage bench with the trainers, and Mark Lieb walked in and he said, Alan's dead. And just looked at me like, what the fuck? Alan's dead. And the hard part about that was I had to get back in. And I had to face Patrick and tell him it's going to be okay. And it was the first stint of the race. And Alan was a guy that I lived with in the UK, not in the same house, but we worked at Palmer's place, and I knew him all along. And I remember seeing him that morning in warm up, and he just said like, hey, slow it down, because we were super quick in the warm up. But that was the first time that I thought to myself, what was it like in the 60s and 70s when that was the news all the time? And then a couple years later, when Sean got into an accident in Australia, and we all traveled to Petit Le Mans, and Sean Edwards was again another great colleague and a guy at the top of his game. At that point, that was the first time it really got to me in the fact that like I needed to strap in and shut that off. And I wondered, what could I get in and do the job? I was scared. I wasn't scared the first time it happened, because you're just in the race. You got to get in. You got to brave it, and you got to go. And so it was like there was no time. But with Sean, we hadn't gotten to the race weekend, so there were multiple days to think about it. And I remember being in the hotel room, and it was a weird time. So where I'm going with all this is I had small peeks into what it must have been like in the heyday when things were super dangerous. And so for as much as people think you have the best job in the world and it's all roses, and you show up and you strap into this car and then you get out and you tell everybody what's wrong with the car and you F off to the hotel, there's definitely some catch yourself moments as you've had in your driving career as well.
Thanks for sharing about Alan, because I had interviewed him one time, and I'm in the pit lane, and I found myself in the media side of things in a really weird place that day. I was, I think I was the only one sent over, I think, that year to do there was no one else. Everyone else was in Charlotte. And I think that was it anyway. And I was doing the pit lane with Andrew Marriott, and I had the Aston. And there's a weird thing we do in media, because obviously we're getting back chat through our headphones that no one else is hearing on air. And I can hear Calvin going, that's not good. That's really, and Lee, and I know we're going, and they're like, go down to the Aston pit. And this is the difference between being a real reporter and a guy like me that's just, transitioned to it. Because Andrew Marriott would have been in there talking to Dave Richards and right in his face. I got as far as the garage and I go, my racing driver side of me came in and I said, I can't even go in there. I can't break that barrier because I know that if someone came near me, the couple of times it happened to me, I wanted to rip someone's fucking head off if they'd come near me media-wise, right? And I could see the pile that, and they had a 3-car garage there, and one bay is, obviously all bays are empty, but there were different energies across the mechanics. All of it was faced with trauma, right? Mm-hmm. Every single one of their faces. But 2 groups of them had to carry on working.
Yeah.
And that to me was like, saw all the helmets, and they had a stand with their helmets, like they do at Le Mans, really make it nice, and they had little cubicles. His fucking helmet isn't there, right? Because his helmet's not there, because he was in the car. He was in the car, and he just died. I tried to do a report from outside and just freaking couldn't do it. I just it was like back to you. I mean, I couldn't handle it. And I remember those anyway, just shit.
Yeah, I think that's the part of it that's fun to come out and look at. It's not fun, but it's real to look at how wild of a sport it really is. It's tough in the moment. Like, you carry so much of that weight, and it's a dangerous sport, and it's a crazy sport. I mean, the stuff that, let's just talk about Le Mans or Bathurst or Nürburgring, the stuff I've seen strapped in a race car. I mean, driving through the debris field when Rockefeller had his crash.
I was just like 80 foot in the air, double backflip into trees, and lived.
Yeah, and I'm driving through his debris under yellow. I'm in the car that time too at Le Mans, and I'm asking, who is it? What's going on? Or Alan's crash, or there's just so many of those moments where you it's not all easy. It's not all. You have the best job in the world. It can be very gnarly at times, but also it can be amazing. Yeah. Like the cars that I've been able to drive, and I think about the 550 Spider, the Carrera Panamericana 550 Spider. That was the first vintage car I ever drove. It was the first air-cooled Porsche I ever drove in my life. And I didn't know it was a $10 million car, or jumping into the 917K and the value of that car and the prominence of that storyline. And so all of these opportunities to drive these cars, so at some point you just switch it off and you're like, I got to do this. This is unbelievable. And there's so much incredible gift that comes along with some of the tougher parts of the race, but or of the racing lifestyle, but wouldn't trade it for anything. My whole being, my whole network, my wife, everything I've seen in the world is on someone else's gift of this sport. So it's an amazing one. It's just at a certain point, you want to look into the face of it and say it's been amazing. I mean, we've talked about it. I remember standing where I was standing in Daytona when you walked up to me and you said, I've had enough. I'm stepping out of the car and I'm going to LA and I'm chasing my dreams. Mm-hmm. And you had a moment of truth in what I saw, and you had to be brave and you had to go against the common belief or the social pressures and say, my purpose now exists elsewhere, and I'm going to go make that happen. And you manifest and you work hard at it and you apply what you applied in your racing to something else. And I mean, you were young. How old were you?
Well, just a bit older than you, maybe early 42.
Yeah, well, your racing age.
Yeah.
I remember you saying, like, I'm going to go do something else now. And that's the feeling. I had a calling that there was something. I remember sitting in Frank Valisar's backyard, the motorsport boss, and we were having a barbecue at his house in Germany. And I said, Frank, one day I'm not going to be a racing driver, and it's soon. And I just have to come clean I don't want you to question my commitment these next few years. I probably had a 3-year deal or something that I'm brave enough to tell him. But I said, I see motorsport as from a driving perspective is the best foundation, or one of the best foundations of college or school that you could have to go on to do other things. You get networked, you get experience, you see how operations work, you see how teams work, you see how communication at the highest level works, and it's a gift. But there's something after motorsport, and I'm not going to be one of these guys who's hanging out at the racetrack at 60 trying to get a ride or telling everybody how good I was. I said, I see this as a springboard to something else. And I still don't know what that is, but I knew that I had to get after it.
I think there's one other thing to that, and that is, and I was talking about it with my son the other day, who wants to go in the military and be an Army Ranger and all that stuff. And I was thinking about his life and his friends, because so many people in life, and we have something that I think we're very fortunate about, and that is, if you've risked, we've just talked about risk and the consequences of it in the worst situation, but if you've risked and you've driven at Le Mans 200 plus, and you've driven in the rain on the banking at Daytona, blah, 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 lots of scenarios, I think it gives you an appreciation for living that is maybe not everyone's luxury to experience. If you've risked, I think you can appreciate life. If you've risked your own life, you can appreciate what it is to live. People said, oh, racing drivers have death wishes. No, I said they have life wishes. Mm-hmm. Racing drivers love life more than anyone I know. Do you think there is an element to that? Because it makes you unafraid in business. You can't die doing Luft. It's financially you could. But do you think there's an element to that? You can sit here now up on this hill because you have risked it all.
Yes and no. I think the feeling mortal is an interesting and an eye-opening experience. Obviously, you don't sign up for a class and know that this week I'm going to do something that makes me feel mortal. I mean, maybe if you're base jumping or something, but those moments come unexpected, but you understand what it takes to face fear and to perform it while you're scared. And those are big tools for anything in life. But coming out the other end of a racing career doesn't mean that the risk goes away. I mean, it's a more dangerous place out on the freeway than it is on a racetrack.
Looking in your garage with mountain bikes and motocross bikes and vintage Porsches and trucks.
No, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean you're safe.
No.
But there are those little gifts both in the action of the sport and also outside of the car that are so amazing. I mean, the desperation that racing drivers grow up in, just trying to get recognized, just trying to get a ride, just trying to get a little bit of sponsorship money. I mean, you quickly learn how to sell yourself to anyone, and how to lead a team and how to develop a product. And so there's so many gifts inside the sport.
The only reason we did this was actually so I could get you to ask Patrick Dempsey who cuts his hair.
His wife.
No.
And I see him because I'm so jealous of this. I'll let you ask the question.
No, that's it. It's a statement. The guy's hair. My girlfriend Melanie said your thing. She went, I think he's more handsome in person than on TV. I said that's just what we all need. He
has a personality.
And he's nice. And talk about
him
because when you went to Le Mans, let's flick back a bit. We'll talk about the hair. His wife
the hair.
Does it?
Okay, so we're on a Vodafone commercial, and I'm doing the stunt driving. He gave me the nod or kind of put it in the contract that Patrick will do my stunts, and so I'm hanging out with him in his motorhome. I don't get a motorhome, but he does. So I'm like just hanging out on his couch, and Jill's there. She's a stylist, she's a makeup artist, she's an entrepreneur, and she's cutting his hair in the makeup room. Like, he gets a daily trim when he's going to be on camera, and I'm thinking that's when you've made it. When you're being prepared for the shoot and you get a little trim.
When you're being fluffed.
Yes. So as you can see, I don't often get a haircut, but Patrick, to see a little bit inside of his world, both as a celebrity and as an actor and as a fan of the sport and as a driver, unreal. And so thankful for the friendship that has continued. I mean, it's almost been 10 years since we first went racing together, and what a period it was. It was interesting. There's a couple of little sound bites in there, or moments in time that you can pick any one of them to go back. So the first time we had a dinner where they told me I was going to Le Mans and I was taking Avenetti's seat, and Avenetti wasn't aware that I was taking his seat, was an interesting point in time. I had just signed up to race for Penske in the road courses of the nationwide series, the Xfinity Cup, the undercard, and so I was super excited to be finally getting to race a NASCAR with a top level team, Penske of all sorts. And then the phone rings, and Uwe Brettel's like, "What are you doing on the 14th of June?" And I'm like, "Oh, nothing." Of course, I've already told Tim I'm in Cindric, and so anyways, showing up with him to Le Mans and a sea of people.
I was there.
Like thousands and thousands of people to just drive in the racetrack on a Wednesday. I realized that he was a much bigger celebrity in France than even in the US, or at least they knew where to find him in France. And so living that life was very interesting, you know, sliding out the back doors of airports, you know, decoys, getting from the parade in Le Mans back to the track, and having switches of cars so that people didn't know which car he was in. I mean, it was like the movies. It really was like the movies. But going international, when we did the WEC together, and going to Dubai, and sneaking out into the desert, and ripping a off-road car up the side of the hill, and just laughing. We just had so much fun together, but also we had some tough moments together where it was all on the line. And we won an FIA WEC race in Japan in the rain, and the relief of that, of getting his first international victory, or of going out on the podium at Le Mans. I remember doing an interview with you at the end of the race, and I said, this is more emotional and more powerful for me than winning the race previously, because we've done it. We've reached the pinnacle for him of getting to Le Mans on the podium, and it was such a gift to see somebody feel so much success. But also there was a lot of pandemonium, and there were a lot of challenges, and there were a lot of struggles, and there was a lot of discussions of how are we going to make ends meet, and how are we going to find the funding. So it was a very, very cool experience, and lots of interesting people around us those 3 years.
I remember being at the mall that year and watching, you know, when you see a visual, imagine a visual of tempestuous seas around a rock, and on this rock was a red-headed race driver who was dealing with shit he had never had to before. I remember the parade because we did a piece down there. I remember being on the grid and couldn't get near your car. Mm-hmm. I remember looking at you thinking you've got so many different emotions going on. You're like, I have to hold myself together. I'm a factory Porsche driver. I've got to lead this team. Fuck, he's a movie star. My God, everyone wants my autograph too. I mean, pandemonium, I think, is the right word. God, trying to get near your garage, and of course, sitting in Charlotte, the producer's like, "Oh, just go and get an interview with Patrick or Pat or this," and I'm going, I can't even get in the freaking garage. And then the European media is so rude, right? Most of the time, they're so pushy that we couldn't get near you, and right. We were like, I had to fight that little blonde girl from Eurosport, who was always writing, and she would get there first, and I'd be like, "No, American TV." It just must have been spectacular for you. I mean, it just must have been. I mean, spectacular, good and bad ways.
It was amazing. I look back on it. There was nothing about it that I thought this is really shit. There were challenges. There were different types of pressures. There were different responsibilities. But it was epic. And interesting enough, we did 2013. We did just Le Mans together, and I forget where we finished 4th or 5th, but it was pretty decent. And then the phone rang in the off season between 14 and 15. So we had gone to, anyways, the phone rang, and Frank Valliser said, "So next year you're going to do WC with Patrick, full time, GTE AM." And I said, "That's great. And then in the US I'll carry on in the white factory car." And he said, "No." He said, you're just going to do WEC. There's a lot of responsibilities. There's a lot of testing. I want you to take them to every single racetrack and pre-run. We're really going for it full time, because before it was just one race a year. Now we're going for the full WEC. So this is all in. And I remember coming home and saying to Lauren, my wife, man, I'm not sure this is good. This feels like a kind of a downward trend for my career, because I'm being pulled out of the factory car in IMSA to go do WEC in an AM car. And how am I going to be viewed? Am I just kind of a gentleman coach at this point? Am I a celebrity handler at this point? And some people asked some hard questions about that, but one person called, Nick Longy. And Nick had been a mentor of mine and a great engineer and an amazing driver. And he said, this is going to be the single biggest moment of your career, because the awareness and the relevance of this program to Porsche means something, that they've chosen you. And I just thought, like, I don't see it that way. But he was right. When I started digging into some of the media reach of Patrick at Le Mans, his numbers were greater than Audi at that time, and Audi was winning, dominating, locking the podium out overall. And Patrick alone in GTE AM was a bigger cast of the net on an impressions and on a database standpoint. And so it was massive for Porsche when he was driving. And he wanted me in the car, and Porsche trusted me, and I had to lead that team. It was a small group of people. We had a great engineering staff. We had an amazing team in Proton, but I was the go-between of the sponsor group, of the team, of Porsche, of Patrick. And so I just remember sitting at home and being on the phone all week, and really just not understanding communication efficiency, and just having one-on-one conversations with so many different people, and just trying to see trends and keep Patrick focused on what he needed to be focused on. And another part of that would be at the racetrack. I would go to the car while he was there, and there were flash bulbs everywhere, and there were people fighting each other, and I would just be like, look at me. You're about to go 200 miles an hour. Here are the only 3 things that matter. So just it was him and I, and I was just like, and he was amazing at all of that, but I would sometimes be his reminder of, like, screw everything else, here's what we're working on, and go. And the last part of that story is, we're leading the race one of the years, and I come in after a triple stint. I drove my ass off, and the car was nailed, and we're leading, and he's getting in. And I know we're not going to be leading after his stint, but hopefully we have enough of a lead now that we're in the fight to the end of the race. I pull into the pits, and there's 60 members of the media in a square around our box where we stop for the pit stop. And I pull in, don't run anybody over, so that's the first thought. Then I get out of the car, and I see him, and I get him into the car, and I close the door. And as soon as I close the door, the fueling's going to end, and then the tires go on. Well, the tire changers are these young German mechanics, and they're looking at me like, what do we do? We can't get to the car? Because all they think is Patrick changes for Patrick, and then the car leaves. But of course, the tires have to be changed. So this all happens in less than 2 seconds. And I just start grabbing overalls and helmets and any straps I can do, and I'm just ripping people out of the way as hard as I can, so that the guys can get in there to change the tires, so we don't lose time on the pit stop. And there's a clip of it. I don't know if it's on YouTube, but I'm throwing and forcing people out, like, in a violent manner. Like, I was on kill at that point, just like get them out of the way. And of course, the journalists didn't know; they just wanted the shot.
Yeah. I mean, we were always sent down to do that. I had a way of, that's why I'd use my ex-driver card.